Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. Having a mascot character was nothing short of commonplace back in the 90s and even early 2000s. For every Mario, Sonic and Crash Bandicoot, we would get a Bubsy or Awesome Possum.
Awesome Possum kicks Dr. Machino's butt.
I'm awesome!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The options for gamers back then were pretty much limitless. However, somewhere in that shuffle, Crystal Dynamics, who were more recently known for the newer Tomb Raider games, managed to create a little character by the name of Gex, who managed to have a pretty successful career, receiving 2 sequels. The Gex Trilogy went on to sell apparently 15 million copies, and the reason I say apparently is because I can't find any concrete evidence to actually suggest that it did sell that many, as in most cases, any of the releases didn't really sell over 1 million copies, with only the 3DO original release claiming to have done so. It's not to say the numbers are wrong, but I do take them with a pinch of salt. Being across a whole bunch of different consoles, Gex could be found on 3DO, Game Boy Color, N64, Windows, PlayStation, and Sega Saturn. So odds are you probably knew someone who had a copy, even if it was that snotty-nosed kid down the street. So as we did with Treasure Planet and the One Piece games, we're going to dive into a trilogy today. So sit back and relax as we jump into the media dimension and explore the games of Gex. With the first game simply being titled Gex, with its initial release being in 1995 for the original 3DO, while later on getting ported to the original PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Windows. Being the first in the series, Gex had to lay the foundation for what the series would become, and although it is a little bit different to its sequels, for the most part it does a really good job of laying this foundation. Instead of being a 3D platformer like its sequels, it is instead a 2D platformer, with the game's overall writing and aesthetic staying pretty much the same amongst all three. This shows a really strong focus on the game's core design, which I think is great. While the combat and everything else stays pretty much identical amongst all the games in terms of the moves Gex has available to him, you will notice in order to get to levels, everything remains the same between all three games, from needing to find TV remotes to unlock new levels while traversing a hub world. I think this consistency helps the series as a whole, so players feel like they know what they're getting into. Gex in a way is kind of the Simpsons of the gaming industry, taking aim at pretty much anything that is pop culture. This is what separates Gex from most of the other mascots in history. Not to say there weren't other fourth wall breaking characters, but Gex does have some pretty decent lines. He can talk a little bit too much, which is pretty common for the time, but if you compare him to someone like Bubsy, who is straight up annoying, I'd rather take Gex any day of the week.
What could possibly go wrong?
To summarize the plot of the first game quickly, Gex finds himself trapped in the media dimension that our villain, Rez, has attempted to take over, in order to only have bad TV shows on the air. Are we sure he didn't succeed? In order to stop Rez, as mentioned earlier, we'll need to traverse the levels in order to find remotes in order to progress, and eventually take him down. While there is probably something to be said about the idea of the hero consuming so much TV that that's how his enemy is able to trap him, this isn't the type of analysis I'm going to be any good at, so I'm not going to go into it. However, if you do like deep dives and breaking down stories from both a written and visual perspective, I highly recommend watching my good friend BabyArms. There'll be a link to his channel below. Being a 2D platformer from the mid-90s, Gex had to find a way to stand out from the crowd, and for what it's worth, I think they found a way to do this. Firstly, the game's visual style. Being something similar to the vein of Donkey Kong Country, Gex has its own unique art style. And it's an art style. There are moments where the game can be a little bit harsh on the eyes, unfortunately, and can be downright ugly. It's not all bad by any means, but typically whenever you have TV static as a full screen effect, it looks really bad. Secondly, what helps this game stand out from a lot of its contemporaries is the fact that gameplay is pretty good. It's not the tightest thing you'll ever play in the world, but it does feel really responsive, and the fact that you can climb pretty much anywhere feels great. However, sadly, this is something that actually disappears in the later games, as there are only designated locations that you can climb on, whereas in the original you can pretty much climb on anything you can see. And the final thing that I think helps it stand out is the fact that we actually have a health system. Although not the most sophisticated health system in the world, being able to take a few hits before dying is actually really nice and very much appreciated, especially in a platformer that can be difficult. At least it was for me, and that's mainly because I'm not particularly great at 2D platformers. I'm not particularly great at 3D platformers either, but we'll get into that in a second. For what it's worth, for a game you can get for less than $10 on GOG, I think it's worth the money. Or if you're willing to wait until 2024, we're getting remasters of the original trilogy, which is really cool, so it's great to see Gex come back. Moving into the third dimension is where Gex probably starts to shine the most. While the gameplay itself might not be as smooth as something like Mario 64, it's definitely one of the better 3D platformers of its era. As mentioned, the series as a whole follows a core game design that is a gift and a bit of a curse.
It's a gift and a curse.
This is because both Gex Enter the Gecko, or Gex 3D, and Gex Deep Cover Gecko pretty much feel the same. Although they have different levels, the core combat, movement, and general overall design is pretty much identical. So we're going to talk about both of them at the same time, just for the sake of time. This means the series as a whole failed to evolve, and which is why I believe the series didn't have any real staying power in the industry, pretty much being a flash in the pan. Although, in saying that, we've had games like COD that make billions doing just that, not really evolving and just doing the same thing over and over again. So who knows, maybe with these remakes it can do something? Both of the 3D games are pretty much the same, as I've mentioned. However, there are some slight differences in presentation. You'll notice the overworlds are a little bit different, with the third game kind of being more like Banjo-Kazooie. And I actually like this change. It does change it up just enough to make things feel a little more fresh. However, as mentioned, it does get a little bit stale as all three games have Rez as the villain. Even Mario had a couple of games where Bowser wasn't the bad guy.
Zangief, you are bad guy. But this does not mean you're bad guy.
What helps save the 3D games from basically being nothing more than clones of the first games is the fact they have some slightly better level design. It's not to say that Gex 1 has bad level design, but I do appreciate what they've done with the 3D games. Sure, it's not perfect since the game's camera can get in the way and make things a little bit harder than they need to be, and the game's slightly more floaty controls makes going fast a little bit harder than you'd like. The levels themselves, though, have a great sense of verticality that is pretty rare for a lot of PS1 games. It's not to say there aren't PS1 games out there that have great verticality to them, but this is just one of the better examples of what I've actually played. And in order to change up the formula just a little bit, the 3D games do things a little bit differently when it comes to collecting the remotes. Yes, we still collect the remotes like we do in Gex 1, however we have a typical formula that each level will follow. Usually it'll be find a remote at the end of the level, find X amount of things within the level that are hidden, typically 5, and complete a level specific challenge. None of these challenges are too hard, so it makes the game really good to just kind of pick up, beat a level or two and then stop, which is great when you think about when this game came out, because typically you would only be able to play for a short period of time, especially if you wanted to be able to watch your favorite shows, because we didn't have Netflix and things of that nature. On top of the 3 remotes you can find, you'll also be able to find hidden remotes. These are usually done by completing special puzzles within each level. You'll also notice we have collectible items that are scattered throughout the world, just like we do in Gex 1. After you collect X amount, you'll be able to gain a life at the end. This actually makes the 3D games a little bit easier compared to the first, since it's pretty easy to stock up on lives. But then again, I could just be trash, so, you know, is what it is.
You're cabbage.
As you travel to all the different levels, you'll notice the soundtrack does a really good job of reflecting this. Though, a little bit campy in terms of their composition when it comes to listening to them. You'll know what I mean when you hear them. It does fit what Gex is going for. It's probably not something you're going to go out of your way to listen to compared to something like, say, the Tekken 3 OST, which is just a personal favorite and a subtle plug to my Tekken video, but the soundtracks are an example of the music being there to service what's going on, not to be the focus. And up to this point, I've probably done a little bit of a disservice to the third game because I think it is better than I'm giving it credit. However, it barely adds anything to the gameplay as a whole. Sure, there might be access to different vehicles and costumes to allow for different powers, but they don't really change a lot or enough, in my opinion, to really be worth your time. They would have been better being in the second game and then the third game evolving from there. Now, an interesting thing that I really want to talk about when it comes to the 3D games is the voice acting. Now, for those who don't know, depending on your region, Gex actually has a different voice. So, I grew up in the PAL region, so I'm used to having Leslie Phillips, aka the motherfucking Sorting Hat from Harry Potter.
Not Slytherin, eh? Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. There's no doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor!
Eat my tail, Nancy boy.
While in the third game, we had Daddy John Jules, who was known as Cat from Red Dwarf, play Gex. For those of you who were born in America, you would have had Dana Gould play Gex. Whereas for those of us in the PAL regions, we only had him play Gex in the first game. As to which version is best, I think that comes down to personal preference, as I'm personally going to be biased towards the PAL regions. However, if we did get more Gex games down the line, I think the nod should go to Dana Gould, as he is the original. It's been a while since we've seen the wires crack and fly, snack and tail, whack and lip, smack and wheel and deal and son of a gun on our consoles, which is a shame, because whether it's Dana Gould, Leslie Phillips, or Daddy John Jules, whoever the voice actor for the titular Gex, we have missed him from our screens. And I think in a more modern setting, he would have immense staying power, especially with the endless supply of material at the disposal of the writers. It'd be a riot. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I'd like to thank you so much for watching this little look back at our boy Gex. Just as a quick update, I have opened up a Ko-fi page if you wish to support the channel. There will only be a basic tier for the time time being, which will allow you to have your name shown at the end of the video. However, later down the line, I will eventually open this up to have early access to videos and also sneak peeks at videos I am working on. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to watch this, and for everyone who has been subscribing, and by the time this video comes out, maybe I've hit 500 or I'm very, very close. So either way, I'd like to thank you all so much for your continued support. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.